2022 marks the 150th year since the founding of our community, Fowler, California. My name is Eric Hatton, and I'll be your host through this special Sesquicentennial series of episodes as we celebrate 150 years of community, tradition, and progress. This past October, I had the opportunity to interview Kenny Bedrosian, a founding member of one of the most recognizable brands in the Central Valley, the National Raisin Company. Mr. Bedrosian was kind enough to sit with me as we discussed his background, his early life in Fowler, and his book, Side by Side with My Brothers, a retrospective on his life and family over the past 75 years. You'll notice that this episode has a bit of a different format from the others in the series, as it was recorded in front of a live studio audience during the opening of the Fowler Historical Museum. It's my pleasure to present to you my interview with Mr. Kenny Bedrosian. All right, with that, I think we'll get started. First of all, I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. I don't know how familiar all of you are with what we're doing and what we have been doing over the last week or so, but this is another one of our fireside chats that we've conducted with families throughout Fowler over the last week. And so the idea behind the project has been to capture, as best we can, what life has been like over the last 150 years in Fowler. And we've done that by interviewing community members, luminaries, everyone has got a story to share, and hopefully in the weeks ahead, there'll be an opportunity for all of you. If you have a story and would like to contribute, we'll be opening it up for submissions as well, so do be thinking of that. But this evening, I am thrilled to welcome Kenny Bedrosian here. Kenny, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me.
My honor and privilege, and I'm most happy to be here to do it.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we've got a lot to touch on, but I think the first thing I want to talk to you about, I know you're going to read and share some excerpts from your book, and you and I were talking a little bit before we started. I had an opportunity to go through it a couple of nights ago, and it's a phenomenal story. It's a great tribute to you and to your family and to everything that you've accomplished in your life and your time here, and I'd like to discuss that in greater detail, but I understand that you've got some stories that you want to share before we get into the content of the book.
I thought it would be good, if I could just share some memories when I was about 10 years old in the town of Fowler and what it was like here. And it was really phenomenal, the different businesses that were all here. Our family moved to Fowler in 1942 from Parlier, and so that was the start. I wasn't born till 1944, and by 1950s, 52, I kind of opened my eyes and found Merced Street and Fifth Street and et cetera. But Fowler was very unique back then. We had a population of about 1,600 to 1,800. My close friend John Good said Fowler really wasn't a city or a town, it was a village. And I think that his point is valid. The different ethnic groups that lived in Fowler included Chinese, Japanese, Armenian, German, Danish, Hispanic, African American, Jewish, etc. We had an Armenian mayor, a Japanese judge, Mikio Uchiyama, an African-American city superintendent, Jim Grigsby, and we had a Mexican police chief, Sal Quintana, who was really a great police chief. He didn't say very much, but we really didn't have any problems in our community because he knew everybody and knew everybody's mannerisms, etc. Mm-hmm. So we were a very unique town in that respect, that all ethnic groups were represented, and it really made it a great place to live. We had 4 grocery stores at that time. 2 proprietors were Armenian, 2 were Chinese. We had 3 drug stores. Oh, wow. The most predominant one was Roy's. We had a bakery, we had a furniture store, we had a hardware store. Those of you that also can remember Sig's Menswear, and then Model Dress Shop. We had 2 doctors, Dr. Nielsen and Dr. Leonardo. We had the Fowler Hospital. We had a fire truck, volunteer fire department. We even had a lumber yard, and I remember as a little boy watching it from where we lived on Temperance and Manning, that area. I could see the lumber yard caught on fire. It was where the post office was now. We had 2 car dealerships, Baxter Chevrolet and Earl Hill Ford. We had 4 cafes. The most well-known was the 99 Cafe and Truck Stop. We had 1 outstanding restaurant, Bruce's Lodge, on the corner of Parlier and the old highway. You remember it had the airplane going into the roof. Great place to eat. It was owned by the Bruce's family, Rocco and Rico Bruce. Of course, we had our Bank of America in the old building. I remember we had a party telephone system. You know, when you got on the phone and there was other people listening, and TV came to my home in 1953. We had a Philco TV. I don't know if you remember something like that. We had many churches. The Armenians had a congregational church and an apostolic church. We had a Catholic church, Presbyterian church, Baptist church. The Baptist church for my family was very instrumental. All 4 of the children in my family were baptized in the old Fowler Baptist church. We had 2 pool halls, 1 bar, in addition to Bruce's Lodge, the Fowler Inn sign, 2 barber shops, 1 beauty salon. Of course, Fowler High School, Fremont School, and Marshall School. This great building, the FIA building, we had the Grange Hall. We had a 5 and dime store. I don't know if you remember Aaron Aronian. He'd throw the towel over his shoulder like this, and he'd be blinking and dusting everything. He's quite a guy. Loves sports. 2 car garage, repair garages, Hondas and Johnny's. 2 gasoline stations. We had a Shell down there at Adams and the old highway, and a Mobile right here on 8th and Merced. The other highlight for our community, we're a small town. We had 3 people that owned airplanes: Ben Baxter, Duke Simonian, and Johnny Tukejian. And I had, as a young boy, I had the opportunity of flying in Ben and Duke's airplanes, and they'd take me up as a little kid to give me a thrill and flip, go over like that. So anyway, Eric, that gives you a little sense of what Fowler was like in the early 1950s.
It sounds idyllic. It sounds perfect. A great place to grow up.
Right, great place to grow up. You didn't lock your doors back then. The high school was like going to a private school, but paid for by the public. Mm-hmm. Great place to live. So maybe you could ask me some questions if you want, or you can. You want me to just to say a few?
Absolutely, yeah. Please continue.
Speak a little louder.
I
can't hear.
I'm not.
I have my hearing aid.
Okay.
You get that at home too?
I get. No, usually she does all the talking and I do the listening. Anyway, our family, the patriarch of our family was my grandpa, Krikor Yehoyan. And he was born in 1877. He came to America in 1907, stayed here for 7 years. And he became a skilled carpenter. He was in the New England area. And anyway, after 7 years, he had a longing to go back home to the little village called Huilu in Armenia or Turkey. And so he went back in 1914, but by 1915, the massacres had started, and the Turkish government and the soldiers, basically annihilated, over 1 million Armenians and marched them into the deserts or slaughtered them one way or the other. And any male in particular was singled out, and that was a priority to eliminate them from the population. And he, of course, stood out, because he had gone to America, had skills as a carpenter, etc. But by God's grace, Armenia was the home of a lot of German and Danish Protestant missionaries. And my grandfather's brother was a Protestant minister, and through him, he got to go into the German mission compound secretly. They took my grandfather's brother's family, and then my grandfather's family, and took him into the compound. Anyway, he stayed there hidden for 6 weeks. He dug a hole in the ground, lined it with wood, and finally, after 6 weeks of just hiding there, he says he got up, he told his wife, "I'm leaving. Whatever happens, happens," So he headed out, and this time he went east instead of west, and he went on a journey for 5 years, going up through Georgia and the Volga River, up into the middle of Russia. The White Russians and the Red Russians were at war, and they were just doing their best to dodge them all the time, and in the process, have enough food to eat. He went through Siberia, ended up going through part of Manchuria and China, a town called Hebron, and there were Armenians in Hebron. And I don't know, I sure would have liked to ask him, how did he know to do that? And he was going with a group of about 50 other Armenians that he was kind of leading. And they got to Hebron, and Japanese soldiers greeted him because Japan had won the 1904 war with Russia. And so anyway, they stayed there for several months, and he'd heard that there was a missionary compound in Vladivostok. So he took his group and they went to Vladivostok, and by this time he was really getting tired. This was, it's been a 5-year journey he was on, and he decided to join the French Foreign Legion, and he thought that would get him to a port in Egypt there where he could go back to America via New England. And so he got on this ship that took him to Yokohama. And finally, he says, "The heck with this, I'm not going to stay on this ship with all these lice and mice and whatever." And he jumped ship when the ship docked in Yokohama, and he met an Armenian family, the Apkarian family, that had a shipping business. And Mrs. Apkarian was very helpful. He went to my grandfather in writing papers and letters to get him a visa to go back into America. And so after 6 or 7 months, he got the visa. And in 1919, you might remember he started in 1915. In 1919, he got to San Francisco, and he stayed with his sister's son, Toros Hampoyan. And so that's how he got to America. So I'll stop there. If you have a question, you could ask me.
Well, talk about an incredibly circuitous journey. I mean, the notion of being all of these different places to come back to America. We can touch a little bit more on your book a bit later, but one of the things, to me at least, that resonated, it was sort of a central theme. I got an incredible sense of gratitude, that you were very, very grateful for the people in your lives, for the community, for the life you've been able to build here. And I know you talk heavily about your grandfather, and the impression I got is there was almost, part of that gratitude is rooted in the notion that because things were so difficult on an international level at the time, that a lot of this was very close to never having happened at all. That they were the kindness of strangers, it was being in the right place at the right time, it was a lot of things that could have ended up differently, that none of this wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't be having this conversation here tonight. And so in that, I got this incredible sense of gratitude that came out of your text that spoke to how fortunate you were to have been here, to have had these people in your lives, and to have made such a home for yourself, not only in America, but here in Fowler.
Very, very true. But in the end, it's by God's grace that my grandfather made it back. And then with his skill as a carpenter, he started building homes. Fresno area at that time, from 1919 to 1930, was booming. People were coming here and starting farming and so on. And so he built a lot of homes in Hazelwood and M Street and that, what they called, Armenia Town. And he earned a lot of money, and he, somehow or another, he found that his two daughters, he had 9 children. Out of the 9 children, only 3 survived. His 2 daughters and his son. And he heard that his 2 daughters were at the Bird's Nest orphanage in Beirut. And so he made contact, and brought my Auntie Mary home to America first via Rhode Island. And then the next year or 6 months later brought my mother, Elizabeth, via the same way. And so they got to America and immediately came to Fresno, and just like any immigrant family, the first thing is to put food on the table and survive. And so that's what they did. But the Depression came in 1932 and wiped my grandpa out, and everything fell apart. In my book, I quote Charles Bonner, Sr., who had a big raisin plant, and he said it's just amazing that America didn't go into a revolution back then in the early 30s, because things were so bad economically. And so anyway, land was dirt cheap. I don't know what he paid for a lousy 30 acres in Parlier. If you go down Adams Avenue, you come to Newmark. You make a left on Newmark, and it curves. And right at that curve, they bought a rundown 30-acre Thompson vineyard that was probably so full of nematodes it hardly produced anything. And so they lived in a barn with the cows and the chickens and so on for a good 3 years. And then my grandfather, because of his skill, built a nice home that had running water inside and a toilet inside, which was unbelievable back then.
Luxury at the time.
Luxury at that time. So that's where they lived until 1942. My grandpa was a typical Armenian. He loved to go to coffee shops. I loved to go to coffee shops and talk. You talk about. In Armenian, there's a word barab. You talk about unnecessary, unimportant things, just talk. So anyway, he'd go to Fresno every day or every other day, and there was a restaurant called Hart's Restaurant on Tulare and Fulton in that area. He'd take me once in a while. And his Armenian cronies, it was 2 stories, his Armenian cronies, they'd all sit up at the second level. Real noisy bunch. And so anyway, he heard about an 80 acres that was for sale at the corner of Temperance and Parlier, owned by a family, the Walling family. And Mr. Walling wanted to sell it and put a high price in there, and my grandfather said this is the time, to take a chance. And he found a buyer for that 30-acre ranch in Parlier because of the house, and they sold it and put all that money down on this 80 acres. It was mostly muskats, and this was during the war. And back then, during the war, if you had grapes, you were forced to make raisins. And but there was a winery in Kerman that had a contract with the Catholic Church to make wine, and they needed muscat grapes, and somehow or another they sold those muscats back then for $100 a ton. Now, they hardly had any water and so on, not a very big crop, but they made enough money to pay for that ranch the next year. Mr. Walling, who anticipated on getting it back, was very upset and didn't want to talk to my family anymore. So anyway, my grandfather kept seeing the rest of that ranch, a big 2-story home on the corner of Manning and Temperance, and he's trying to figure out a way to buy the rest of it. He was a real entrepreneur. And so there was a man named Mr. McSherry that he met at that Hart's Restaurant, and Mr. McSherry was in real estate, and he fronted for my grandpa, and somehow or another they talked to Mr. Walling and got him to put the ranch up for sale, and they took a chance and bought the rest of that. It was a 160-acre block, and they bought the rest of it. And we moved there in 1949. My brother Kay's wife lives there now. But talk about a Disneyland type of environment to grow up in. There were 7 of us in that home. My mother did all the cooking, washing. She had to hang the clothes up on the wires to dry them. Thank you. Anyway, she worked day and night. But I remember as a little boy, we grew alfalfa. In addition to the grapes, we grew a lot of cut fruit. I remember cutting peaches, and all the fuzz getting on me and started to itch. And I remember a cow being born. I remember going to with my dad to milk the cow. Great experience hearing the milk hit the bottom of the pail. And and I remember going with my grandpa to catch the chicken for Sunday dinner on Saturday. And he had a long hook, and he'd catch that chicken, and he'd bring him over to the stump and cut the head off, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, the worst part about that is when my mother boiled the chicken, that smell is still with me, and it's a terrible smell, but she had to boil it to pull the feathers out. Now, that Sunday dinner with her pilaf and the chicken made up for it. Maybe I'll stop there if you have a question. Or
Well, so you've had an opportunity we talked about what it was like to grow up in Fowler. You've also had an opportunity to watch it grow and change, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on not only where we've been, but where you think we're going.
Well, unfortunately, I like the village concept better. But the town is growing, and you can't stop growth. But we can, as a community, maintain our values, in our school systems, and the things that really make Fowler a special place to grow up in, special place to go to school in, a safe place that people feel very comfortable in being a part of. So that's our responsibility now.
In talking with other guests, they've mentioned that too, the idea of the culture that's been cultivated here in Fowler. And that culture speaks to one of responsibility to one's neighbor, care and concern for the outcome of the kids, just a general sense of neighborliness that's becoming increasingly more difficult to find in other places.
And Fowler still has that. This is an example of that. And this weekend, I'm being one of the hosts for my high school 60th class reunion. So that goes to show you how, even though we're all spread out all over the country, we still have an emotional tie to our community and to our schools.
I want to touch a little bit on your book. You wrote this it looks like, about 2 years ago now, 2020?
Took me 2 years to write. I started in 2018, and I finished in 2020.
It's a voluminous text about the history of your family. What motivated you to sit down and write the book?
My grandpa, in 1952, he wrote his memoir of that 5-year journey. And he wrote it in Armenian. This is his picture. He wrote it in Armenian, and we had a cousin in Rhode Island, Victoria Dadikian, and she translated that in 1970 and into English. And so each one of the children in our family got a copy of this. And that's what inspired me. In the back of my mind, this was on my bookshelf, and one day I read it, and it really touched me, what he went through to get here. And so that was one thing. The other thing is when John Good sent me a picture of our kindergarten class in 1949. Now I've been told that I'm one of the two famous authors in Fowler. The other, Fowler and Selma, the other one is Victor Davis Hanson.
That's good company. You can't argue with that comparison.
I thought you would say Randy McFarland.
Yeah, it's Randy. Boy, I hope Randy's not here. I had to put my glasses on. But anyway, John sent this picture. I don't know how he kept it. Here it is. This is my kindergarten class in 1949. And this school was at the corner of Vine and 5th Street. And that was the old, grades, probably kindergarten through 4. Then from there you went to Fremont. So the leaders of our community built James Marshall School. And in 1949, we were the first kindergarten class to go there. And so that was the start of to go to a brand new school from this school. This was old and tired. But anyway, that inspired me. If you look at this picture, there's all different ethnic groups. Bedrosian Thompson was African American. Doris Weinberg was Jewish. You name it, we had it. There's Japanese kids in here, Chinese kids, and so that also inspired me to write this book, and that was how I got it started. But and I had senior English from a teacher called Mr. Groffley, great teacher, but he gave me a D.
Oh, well, if he could see you now,
and I cried when I got. I said, Mr. Groffley, I can't take a D home to my mother, And anyway, he said, I'm not changing it. He was tough guy. And I think I got out of there with a C at the end. But writing has always been difficult. Speaking has always been difficult. But anyway, I somehow or another, I think God inspired me to some of these things I reread now, and I start to cry. Very, very touching.
Oh, absolutely. And again, I think that comes across, the sense of gratitude in the book and the meaningful relationships you've had with people throughout your life. One of them, in fact, I don't look over, but the title of your book, Side by Side with My Brothers, of course, speaks to the relationship, not only personally, but professionally, you had with your brothers. I was hoping we could talk a little bit about what that experience was like, to be able to build such a great business with the two of them.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that is reminding me. This book I dedicated to my two brothers. This book is dedicated to my brothers, Ernest A. Bedrosian and Krikor Y. Bedrosian. Although much younger, I was 10 years younger than them, they always shared their love and accomplishments on an equal basis with me. All that my family has today is because of their gracious hand. It is by their vision that we enjoy our success today. Now, success sometimes is fleeting. One of my favorite people in the world was Winston Churchill, and he had a saying: "Success is not final, failure is not fatal. The courage to continue is what counts." And every business has its ups or downs. Ups and downs, but it's because of my brothers that I have, and my son Paul and my other children have what they have, my wife has. I quoted a verse from Proverbs: "Where there is no vision, the people perish." Proverbs 29:18. And my brothers, because they were older, after they got started in farming, they had a vision of what they wanted to do. They wanted to be more in control of marketing their own products and so on. And we became large raisin growers. And then in 1969, we had a neighbor on one of our ranches, a real colorful man, Harry Rustigian. Harry's still living now. He's over 100 years old, or for sure 100. He comes from a part of Armenia where the people live long time, Husineksis. Anyway, he talked my older brother Ernie, and he says, my dad had a raisin plant during the Depression came and wiped him out. But he says, how about, all the growers, why don't we start a raisin company? And so Ernie was on the other side, was, bargaining with the packers trying to get more money, and now this man wanted him to switch sides. And anyway, Ernie went along with the idea, and that was the start in 1969 of starting National Raisin Company. And Harry stayed in the business for about 3 years, and when you start a new business, things are tough.
Sure.
And things were tough. We were hardly making it. And he says, he told Ernie and Kay, he says, I want to go back just to farming. And so he went back to farming, but for many years he brought his raisins to the company. Now, could I share one other story?
Please, absolutely.
Okay. So we were in the bulk raisin business, and that's the lowest margin business you can be in. But my older brother Ernie always knew that if you wanted higher margins, you had to go to a higher quality level customer. And our first high level customer was General Mills. They were coming out with the granolas and different products. They still have them. But that was the start, and then from there, we found we got into the sugar coating business for Kellogg's and for Ralston, and anyway, we built our business up to a level of about 50 or 60,000 tons of raisins and prunes, and we went into other dried fruits like apricots. We imported a slug of apricots all the time from Turkey, of all places. So we built the business up to that level, but we still weren't getting the margins we needed. And the Dole Fruit Company was in the raisin business, competing against Sun-Maid, and finally they decided that they wanted to leave the raisin business. They realized that margins weren't as good as pineapples.
Too tight, yeah.
So they decided to exit, and with them, the private label store business with Walmart, Kroger, Publix, Safeway, all those big companies became available. Now my brother Ernie was a very visionary type of guy. He realized that may be good margins, but you have to have a lot of money to buy all the packaging.
Sure.
And so anyway, we got into that business, and it's brought us this far, but it's a tough business because, again, you have to always have big inventories. So anyway, that's how we built the business. We still have our private label business, not so much our bulk business, but raisin business, dried fruit business, tough business. Anything in agriculture is tough.
Well, and it's only getting more difficult with lack of water and regulations and all the other variables. It's only getting harder. Yeah. You also mentioned in your book, you talk a lot about your family and the importance of family. What has it been like for you to watch your children get involved in the business and take it over and leave it to the next generation?
In 2012, good question, my brothers and I, we decided we were going to give all of our farms and all of the company stock to our children, in three proportion. And so we did that, and in 2014, both of my older brothers passed. So it was good for estate taxes, but then the government, the people in Congress, they're all millionaires, so they made the level real high, so it really didn't have to do that. But I hear rumors now that the government is just wanting to raise the estate taxes to be able to spread the wealth around all America. So anyway, I have nothing to do with it now. And I'm 78 years old. One day I'll be in heaven, and
it's their responsibility now.
Their responsibility.
Absolutely. You talk about being 78. Now you have time to pursue passion projects like writing this book. how else do you choose to spend your days?
Well, I watch a lot of TV.
I laugh because I love Hallmark movies, so it's
They're about the cleanest things on TV, cleanest movies. But anyway, I got involved in the stock market in 1987. I didn't know what I was doing, and I invested a lot of money, and I lost it on margin. I bought on margin, and that was the most stupidest thing that I could have done. I didn't know, because a few weeks later, the market collapsed.
right. Yeah.
And then they pick up the phone. They say, "Mr. Bedrosian, you know, you're past the limit. You got to come up with $200,000-300,000, you know, to even the score."
Right.
So anyway, after that experience, I didn't go back into the stock market for probably early 2000. And so I developed a system. I buy a stock, I always sell a call to lower my entry point. And I don't make very much, but I very rarely lose.
That's a good strategy.
So I read an article once, winning by not losing.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Are there any other stories that you want to share?
I don't know, I had my heroes in life. I told you about Churchill. I love Churchill. I don't know, sometime in the 6th grade or 7th grade, I read a little story about him and about his speech on will never surrender, you know, on the beaches, we'll fight them in the wherever. And he was a hero. I liked General Patton. He was a hero. I loved that movie, and I read a lot about Patton and about how he took 100,000 men in the cold of winter, flipped them around on an angle, you know, and he headed to Bastogne to save, I think, the 82nd Airborne or one of those. And another hero was General Tecumseh Sherman. You know, the Civil War was a tough war, and we weren't doing too good. The North, I sided myself with the North. Hope that's politically responsible. But anyway, Sherman in his mind says, well, why don't we give the Southerners a taste of what it's like to go through war? And he took off from somewhere in Tennessee and went all the way down to Atlanta and burned Atlanta. Then he went to Savannah. Anyway, it broke the will of the Southern people, and Grant was coming from the other end. So then my other hero was, what's the one, the man that wrote Almighty Fortress? This is embarrassing. Good thing Victor's not here. He was a German theologian.
Oh, Martin Luther.
Yeah, Martin Luther. Martin Luther. And you know, early on in my life, I read about him and how it was because of him, how that, you know, we had the opportunity. We didn't have to go through anybody else to pray to God and have a relationship with God. We could go direct, which was, you know, an eye-opening concept that started the Reformation and started the Protestant. But anyway, he also wrote a song in the 1500s or 1600s, my favorite hymn. Hope they sing it at my funeral. A mighty fortress is our God. So that pretty much says what I want to say.
Fair enough. Well, we can leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and thank you for the opportunity to live in a wonderful community such as Fowler.
Hear, hear. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Good idea.
You didn't mention earning with the RBA. Don't you think that's a significant with our business?
Yeah, that's a good point. Not so much, but I want to You folks have all heard of Kearney Field Station and Kearney Park, and the man's name that those were all named after was Theo Kearney. And Theo Kearney in 1898 organized the raisin growers. The raisin industry goes back into the 1890s, but he had success and then he had failures, and this is what he wrote on his epitaph. He wrote his epitaph before he died. He says, "Warning," in big print, "warning. Here lies the body of M. Theo Kearney, a visionary who thought he could teach the average farmer, and in particular the raisin grower, some of the requirements of sound business management. For 8 years he worked strenuously at his task, and at the end of that time he was no further ahead than at the beginning. The effort killed him." So, anyway, the raisin growers for some reason were different than the almond growers and all the other commodities. Those people all have brains. Raisin growers have a lot of will, but they're very independent-minded people. And so anyway, my brother Ernie got involved in growing raisins, and he wasn't making it. Our family wasn't making it. Back then, raisins were, I think, $180 a ton was a high price. And so anyway, he got together. There was a marketing order, a federal marketing order that controlled the volume to the market. And ahead of that was a man named Sesquicentennial. And somehow or another, Ernie went to these meetings, and he harassed Mr. Sesquicentennial to the point where Mr. Sesquicentennial invited him to be a part of the inner circle. He figured if he's in front of me, he can't harass me too much. So with the means of the marketing order controlling volume, then Ernie in his mind said, well, the only thing I need to do is organize these growers and get enough tonnage like Theo Kearney did. Then I could set the price for the grower. And that's what he did. In 1969, they formed the RBA, and I'll read you what they gave him, a plaque a long time after he had left the RBA, but I'll read it to you. It's kind of touching. Ernie, the Godfather Bedrosian. 30 years ago, 51 courageous farmers joined with Ernie Bedrosian to form the Raisin Bargaining Association. That was one of his philosophies, is he wanted to make his effort all-inclusive. He had people from Kerman, Biola, all the way down to Bakersfield. 51 board of directors. Unusual to have that many people. The Raisin Bargain, a cooperative whose intent was to improve the economic conditions of the California 5,000 raisin growers. While the formation of the RBA was certainly a team effort, Ernie's energy and tenacity and conviction provided the catalyst to solidify this new organization. His perspective paid off, his perseverance paid off. The RBA has since grown to the membership of 2,000 growers, making it the largest bargaining association of its type in the United States. Ernie, the entire raisin industry has prospered from your efforts. We sincerely thank you. Raisin Bargaining Association. This was written in 1996. Now you fast forward to 2021, and the Raisin Bargaining Association is practically non-existent anymore. They lost sight of what they were supposed to be doing, and anyway, nothing is forever. There's something else I thought it'd be interesting. In doing my research on this book, I found a book written by Victoria Saker Woosty. She written in 1998, The Farmers Benevolent Trust. It talks about how Sun-Maid was really the power of the raisin industry, and a lot of they forcibly wanted people to join Sun-Maid. They went through those battles in the 1919s. 1919 to 1930. I mean, they'd burn your barn or whatever. Those were tough times. They weren't making much money, and Sunmaid's concept was if we could get all the growers organized and all the growers under one roof, then we could set the price, and they did for a while. They had a monopoly. But anyway, in this book that this Victoria wrote, she had the Armenian population of the different communities in this area. And Fowler, in 1918 to 1920, Fowler had 1,000 Armenians out of a total population of 1,528, 65% of the population was Armenian. Anyway, that's how we all got here.
I had to tease my wife a bit. I remember looking at that graph the other night, and she's from Kingsburg, and of course Kingsburg identifies themselves as the Swedish village, but the population on a percentage basis in 1918 was over 60%, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, Kingsburg had 600 Armenians out of 1,316 population, 46%.
46%, yeah.
My Uncle George, bless his heart, we'd pruned together, and his name was Isajan, George Isajan. His family was from Kingsburg. And so he's pruning on that side of the row, and I'm pruning on this side. And he's telling me in Armenian, Kenny, I'm in college, Kenny, you should go to Kingsburg and find a beautiful blonde girl and marry her. And he's telling me this in Armenian. And anyway, so blondes in Kingsburg must have made a real impression on him.
Apparently. And for our listeners, for posterity, his wife's rolling her eyes as he says that, as she's in the crowd here. She took too kindly to that. One last thing I want to ask you before you go. 78 years worth of life experiences. What are your takeaways? If you had to surmise your top 3 lessons that you want to share, what would those be?
I'm only qualified to give one. I think the most important thing is our faith. For me, it's my Christian faith. And my father, in 1958 or sometime in there, Billy Graham held a crusade at Ratcliffe Stadium. And my father took me, and I went forward at that crusade, and that was the start of my Christian experience. I didn't completely understand, things back then. But over a period of time, my Christian faith became more and more important. I've had crises in my life. I fought cancer in 1986. I had a quadruple bypass in 1999. Came this close of going into the Vietnam War. I did something that was unheard of. I wrote a letter to President Nixon, General Hershey of the draft, B.F. Sisk, Senator Cranston, Senator Murphy, and I told them I was teaching in a ghetto school in L.A. And if they thought that was worthy enough for me not to go to the Army. And a few days before I was supposed to report to Fort Ord, they gave me a deferment. So God has been instrumental in saving my life several times, and I'm here today to say that publicly, that it's by my relationship with Him and by my faith in Him that I'm here today, and by God's love and grace.
I think that's a great place to end it. Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time to be here this evening. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
A special thanks again to the members of the Sesquicentennial Committee who put so much of their time and effort into making this year's celebration a success. I'll be the first to admit that working on this project affected me in ways that I never anticipated. When Stephanie and Juan Mejia so graciously reached out to ask if I'd be interested in participating in this project, I was going through what you might call my own crisis of faith. Over the last several years, one hasn't had to look very far to find stories that would lead you to believe that America is tearing itself apart from the inside out, that we as a people have become so polarized that we can hardly live with one another, much less move our country forward. And then a project like this comes along, and it gives one the opportunity to go out into the community, to meet people, to listen to their stories, and very quickly come to the realization that the world is not as dire as it seems on the internet. That you are blessed. You're blessed to live in a special place, a place that is made so special because for 150 years, people in Fowler have made the conscious choice to care about what happens in their community, to care about their children and the quality of their education, to care about their neighbors, to care about the place that they call home. And if I have one hope and prayer for future generations who will hear these recordings, it's that they continue to care, that they continue to build on the work that was started over 150 years ago that has made Fowler such a tremendous place to call home. Thank you to all of those who participated in this interview series. It has truly been a privilege to share these stories with all of you. Happy New Year's, Fowler, and here is to the next 150 years.